to get the truth out to the world because everybody is having skepticism during this point of time. And a lot of misinformation is also circulated on the internet as well, and people don't know what to believe. And I think I'm using my knowledge from my the education I was taught in the international system to give the people the more realistic view. Because
and why do you think there is so much misinformation, Rashni?
I think there is so much of misinformation because it depends on the person's level of thinking, because I think the education system is failing us right now at this moment of time. So it depends on how you think. And I would say medicine is not like a straightforward answer. Like when you're always talking about modern day medicine, there's obviously something going wrong in it because it's released out in the world at a faster pace. And when you take a vaccine, for example, it's a drug classified, 80% drug, 20% biological product. And it takes 10 to 15 years to actually form one drug. And this particular vaccine is coming from many years of research, from the cold to the MERS. And then from the MERS, it's coming. That's how the COVID vaccine is developed. But again, people have to start thinking critically, because the thing is that, again, the time period is still too little, or even you don't know the long-term effects. People are actually dying from it as well. And more than 4,000 in the US suggested on the CDC news. And I think that people of the government should mandate it when this side of the thing is happening. So I think government officials think that this side of the story isn't true at all. And therefore, a lot of disagreements, people are dividing into two separate groups, and they're fighting actually because I think that everybody has this like specific knowledge, and it's very little. But I would say if a big, huge, actually medicine is like the second hardest course in the world, I would say that. So the answers are not so straightforward as you think. And this is why many people are getting confused, and they're not using the right language to describe it. So I would say that there are some errors also when news reporters explain what's going on. They use certain terms, and those terms are like inaccurate. The point of view from a doctor, if they actually talk about it, they're going to say that, oh my God, that's completely inaccurate because a news reporter just gave their point of view. The terms used are not accurate.
Yeah, interesting. You know, there's been a lot of discussion on both the right and the left in the United States about the vaccines. And what's interesting is that on both ends of the spectrum, there are groups who do not believe in the vaccine, whether they don't believe they either need it, or they don't believe it's real, or they don't believe it's being presented as the real motivation for governments wanting to give it to people. And I've engaged in discussions with both people on the right and on the left on this issue. Where it's interesting, where you can see both groups kind of struggling with the same question, is when I pose to them a question about the future. So the people on the right don't necessarily believe in climate change, but there are some who acknowledge that the world is changing. They just don't want to say what they believe is causing it. I mean, everybody can see that the world is heating up. And as the world heats up, then we lose the Russian permafrost, and we lose a lot of ice from the Arctic, from the poles, if you will.
Yeah, I believe that. The climate change. I believe it because from a young age I was taught about climate change, and I kind of have like ecological footprint developed it over time.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And so the question I pose is, as the ice melts, particularly the Russian permafrost, epidemiologists are finding that there are viruses that have been frozen for, some for millions of years, and certainly a number for hundreds of thousands of years. And so their fear is that a virus that humans have absolutely no ability to fight off because we haven't ever faced it, or we haven't faced it for hundreds of thousands of years, will be introduced accidentally by someone who catches the virus. And it could be a massive dieback of the human race like that, because we're going to be completely unprepared. And so my question then to both people on the right and the left is, if that were to happen, for instance, let's say a super polio virus was found, and this polio virus, and polio used to be called the bone crunching disease, incredibly painful, wiped out in much of the world. But imagine a super polio virus comes out, and so the scientists have to quickly adapt the current polio vaccine to something different. And let's say they do, because of the advance in AI, the advance in fact that they've been studying this stuff for a decade, it happens. Would you take the virus? I mean, would you take the vaccine to fight off that virus?
The thing is that I would actually take the logical side first. I would just maintain my part to society by maintaining like social distancing, taking care of myself manually, because I believe that a certain amount of time has to be taken to actually give off those vaccines. First, you need to run several tests first of all to make sure it's safe for the other people to actually take it.
Yeah, so I understand that, but now imagine 1 million people have died worldwide. Now imagine 2, now it's 4, and it's quickly escalating. At what point do you decide that, you know what, millions of people are dying, and yes, they rushed this vaccine to market, yes, but nevertheless, and a few thousand people are dying from, reactions. Usually they might have had something previous. And so we don't know all of the interactions of the vaccine. But at what point do you say, millions are dying, I don't want to accidentally catch it and give it to my grandmother or my nephew or niece who are unvaccinated?
Yes, but I wish that there was some equation to do so, because actually calculate that kind of risk factor. Because right, from where I'm living, it's like I'm living on top of a hill, so away from a city. And I kind of like, there has been no cases around in my area. So I would say that I'm safe, and I'm trying to like adapt to the situation by actually growing my business online. So yes, so I'm trying to adapt to the situation. And yeah, I would say I'm kind of like isolated from getting the disease. So I have that sort of confidence in me.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. So, and that's great that you have that. And in the United States, we have an expression about privilege. Privilege is when you don't recognize how fortunate you are, right? Yes. And so it's a privilege that you and I can work from home. It's a yes, privilege that we're able to maintain social distance. But when you think about the millions of people in Sri Lanka, in France, in the United yes, States, who rely on a paycheck from working in person and who are exposed, those people, they don't have that privilege. They have no ability to socially distance and feed their family. Yes. And there are literally billions of people on this planet who are in that situation.
And I would say that to take the vaccine in that case.
Yeah.
I would say to take the vaccine, because I feel like if you can't adapt to the situation quickly, you have to take the vaccine. But so for different
and I think that's what we have with the COVID.
Yeah.
Right. I think we have that with the COVID. It may not be we may not know that it came from the Russian permafrost, the melting of it.
Yes.
And there is legitimate questions because we don't have really solid answers as to where it came from. Yeah. I mean, there's definitely theories that, a bat versus in a lab, but regardless of where it came from, the fact is it's killed well over 4 million people by now. And there's just a lot of people who are unable to live their life without going out into the world.
Yes.
Now, there are some risk takers who go to motorcycle rallies, without a mask. But that's, like that is freedom for them. But the problem comes when they get it in their recklessness and then they give it to grandma or they give it to the niece or nephew. That's where we see the problem. And that's tough. Like if you are socially responsible like you are, then I can see you not getting the vaccine and you're not going to be a risk factor for everyone around you. But there's a lot of people who don't want the vaccine and they don't want to mitigate their risk. They just kind of wish that life was exactly like it was before 4 million people died. And that's where our danger comes in.
I think from the early times of the pandemic, like everybody thought that this disease was fake, actually, because nobody could see it. Nobody knows what it was and stuff like this. And until like my friends who are like doctors and who are working in the hospital, they were telling me this disease actually exists. So the thing is that there's nothing wrong. Like it's not fake. It's just that the stats are being like exaggerated. So I would say the test is not accurate as much because you can't exactly distinguish COVID-19. There are similar symptoms when it comes to other diseases as well. And there has been this kind of political exaggeration for some unknown reason. And that is escalating the fear. And plus, pharmaceutical industries are taking advantage of this situation because, okay, this is a good time for us to promote the product and maybe escalate the prices a bit because they have. Considering the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, they are now like 4 more euros higher than it initially was.
Right.
So, yeah.
Yeah. And, it's interesting. I think back to some conspiracy theorists who believe Bill Gates is putting some type of microchip in the virus so that they can track us, right?
No.
And what's interesting,
yeah.
Right, exactly. But what's interesting about that theory is they are right in looking at Bill Gates's role in this virus, because you probably remember in the early stages of the virus, the World Health Organization had brought in 8 or 9 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world and had got them to agree in principle to create a global vaccine, an open source global vaccine that none of the 8 or 9 companies would own, and that basically would be distributed at cost throughout the world because, from the very beginning, people understood that if one country remains unvaccinated, eventually it will get back out in some type of variant. Now, what's interesting about that opportunity that we missed was the reason why we missed it. And it was Bill Gates' intervention. About 2 or 3 months after that project began, Bill Gates, through his foundation, offered this unbelievable sum of money to help companies create a vaccine. But with the contingency that vaccine remained the intellectual property of that company. Because Bill Gates, his ideology is not that he wants to control every human being on the earth. I mean, that doesn't make sense. Our cell phones already, track us.
Exactly.
But rather, it was because of the corporate profit motive. And you may not know this about Bill Gates because you probably were not in the United States at the time, but during the 80s and 90s, he was brought up in federal court by 2 successive administrations, so both a Democrat and a Republican, who went after him for a monopoly of his Windows product. And he fought them for 8 or 9 years. And, eventually he was able to get a settlement that was very advantageous to his company. But that instilled in him an absolute distrust of anybody trying to interfere with intellectual property. And so that is why, that is part of his ideological makeup, that on the one hand, he wants to help the world, vaccines, clean water, things like that. But the way he goes about doing it is always most advantageous to the companies, as you point out. So now the pharmaceutical companies never did the open vaccine. They own the intellectual property, and they can slowly or quickly increase the prices for these vaccines as they want, because they were able to get such amazing seed funding and political backing from Bill Gates Foundation, or at the time called the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So it is interesting how even in conspiracy theories, there's always a small element of truth that's usually twisted around for someone else's advantage. You almost wonder if Bill Gates is the one who created the ridiculous theory of him putting the microchips into the vaccine, just so that people wouldn't notice what he had done with intellectual property. But that's probably a step too far.
Yeah, that's a step, I would say, into the future, because now you can control nanoparticles and liposomes, because they are like artificial. They can be made in the lab itself. It's not, you can't take, you don't have to get a natural liposome or nanoparticle, so I would say. So this theory can be true within the like future, like maybe like 100 to 100 years from now, I would say, But right now, I would say we are too slow for actually something like that to happen. But yes, there's a possibility that it can happen in the future. Because once we learn how to control the nanoparticle and liposome, who knows, anybody can do anything to us.
Yeah, it's true. And though what I find interesting, though, is by the time we get to that point, someone will have created products that will make us believe if we inject or if we take a certain nanoparticles within a vitamin capsule, it will make us smarter with better memory or better looking, or we'll lose our fat, whatever it is. I think we'll probably do that willingly. We won't need the government to inject it into us.
And plus, this vaccine also has a psychological effect on so many people, because it actually gives some sort of placebo effect, because everybody has a very shallow understanding of, I say, vaccines. So vaccines, they say, okay, normally a vaccine is supposed to create antibodies and therefore protect you from that particular disease. But that's a very, I would say, very shallow understanding of the term vaccines. So it's not always going to protect you. There are some, in most cases, it's like, let's say this, when you consider this virus is really fast growing. It grows super fast. And I was also taught that normally vaccines do not give you herd immunity. And why is the government pressurizing us to take it in all circumstances? And I learned this in my actually university, study medicine, and I learned this, and I spoke to a doctor, like I had like several hours of conversation regarding this. So now I can actually talk about it with everybody on podcasts and even on my Instagram. Sometimes I had this conversation before in prior, and I just want to tell you that this is what I learned.
Yeah. Well, and your background in science is definitely stronger than mine. But I have a very good background in history. And so one of the things that you can look at is just the historical application of previous vaccines. And I don't think any of the theories I've heard on this vaccine would at all apply to any of the other vaccines that were developed in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. Like the conspiracy doesn't track back 70 to 80 years. Yet, it's certainly in the United States, and I can only speak for our country's history of vaccination, we have wiped out a number of childhood diseases from the vaccines. I mean, completely wiped them out.
Yes,
and
it's revolutionary compared to some of the historical events. But again, there is also skepticism, because every time there's a success, it's been broadly like advertised, but every time there's a failure, it's been tried to hidden down in history. It's been they try to hide all their failures under the soil, I would say.
Yeah, well, and I mean, if most vaccines are created by for-profit pharmaceutical companies, it stands to reason that they would hide their failures for their own stock prices. that doesn't make it a conspiracy about the efficacy of the actual vaccines that work. Rather, that would just belie any claim that all vaccines ever in development would work. But that's what we call a red herring argument. No one is, or a straw man argument. No one is really making that argument that all vaccines that anybody's ever tried work. In fact, I would say probably, and I am in no way defending pharmaceutical companies, but I would say on the whole, any pharmaceutical company would admit 90% of the things they try to do end up not working. And then with every failure, you stack your failures until you finally succeed. I mean, that's science, right? Yes. That when something doesn't work in your testing, then you learn from that failure and you move on to the next iteration. And that's why, science is as powerful as it is because we apply a set of iterations until we finally get to the right product.
And also there's another factor, it's called fate. I think the thing is that it depends on the virus, whether it wants to, whether it can exist within a point of time, let's say. And this gives a kind of psychological benefit for the people every time they get the vaccine, because it works like some sort of placebo effect. So every time the virus comes and it leaves this sort of environment, you don't know whether it actually left, or you don't know whether this is just a placebo effect that's working in your head, saying that, okay, now I took the vaccine and now, okay, I won't get the disease. Something like that. Yeah.
I mean, and that's an interesting theory. Certainly the power of placebo is awesome to behold, what our minds can do. In the United States, at least, about 95% of our vaccines are given to us when we're young children. And believe me, there's no placebo effect there, because no kid wants the vaccine. None of them understand what, say, polio is or any other of the diseases they're being inoculated with. So if it works on a child and it protects them, say, from measles or rubella from the rest of their life, that's not placebo. That's science. Because
that's science.
Placebos don't work on 5-year-olds or 3-year-olds. I mean, we have daughters who are 2.5 years of age, and they've already been given probably 3 rounds of different vaccines, and they'll never know that they were given those. They'll never remember them. They'll have zero placebo effect, but they definitely are protected from the myriad of diseases that would have infected them, say, in the 1930s or the 1940s United States.
I would say that is true, because the thing is that I would say medicine is not a definite answer. It's a really complicated one. That's why it's the second most hardest course in the world. So I mean,
what's the hardest? If medicine is not the hardest,
it's like engineering, because it's math.
Good point.
It's not complete words, but I still think that medicine should be in top, because it's a completely long period of time to get there, I would say.
And it's ever changing.
Yeah.
You could graduate from Harvard Medical School in 2010, and by 2020, so much medicine and science and knowledge has changed that you're almost antiquated in your belief system just 10 years later.
That's why you have to keep reading. You have to, so many people become doctors and they actually stop reading, and that's the biggest mistake.
Absolutely.
Yes, because it's your education does not stop when you finish uni. Uni and you start working, you have to still keep reading. And I think that most of the mistakes that doctors make is because of that. I was actually back at home. For viruses, they give antibiotics. And a doctor who graduated from Oxford University at the time actually gave my little brother an antibiotic for a virus infection, and his heart was escalating at the time. So there are some sort of mistakes was happening, but it was fate that he actually survived from it.
Right. Yeah, that's very familiar. That sounds very familiar to what happens and has happened in the United States. I think it's still continuing happening, that we are so it starts with pharmaceutical companies constantly putting out propaganda about how certain medicines will, protect us from certain issues, right? And a lot of them, are unnecessary, and there's just it's a profit motive for the pharmaceutical companies. They advertise this. The patients see it. The patients then ask the doctors for it. And so doctors now are so used to being pushed by their patients for a certain type of medicine that when you get a sick child or you yourself are sick and you're like, I need antibiotics, even though it's a viral infection instead of a biological infection, doctors will too often just say yes. And it's not that the doctors believe that is the correct notion. They know that the antibiotics will not help you with the virus, but I think they justify it in their head saying, well, there's still a 10% chance it is a bacterial infection and not a viral infection, right? And frankly, I don't want the hassle of this person complaining to my manager that I'm a bad doctor by not giving her the antibiotics, because then the patients will claim, you don't want to give me the antibiotics because it's costing the insurance company too much and you're controlled by the insurance company. So these doctors are in this unenviable situation where if they don't give a medicine that is absolutely useless, they will be taken into some type of, not court, but administrative hearing.
Yes. But I think that yet you should actually try to be more holistic in these type of approaches, because I think that you can't exactly depend 100% of the time on pharmaceutical industries.
Agreed.
And pharmaceutical industries per solution. That, we have to also take a look at the holistic side. I mean, in the medical university, we were never shown the holistic side because, again, the education is also promoting, drugs and
It would be really interesting project to try to take the best of Western medicine, the best of
Eastern medicine as well.
Exactly, from India to China, and some of the Buddhist nations have different approaches. And I am someone who I have such a Western mind, but I know I have gone to acupuncture and I have been relieved of pain or a symptom that 3 or 4 different appointments with the Western doctor did nothing for me. And I think until we get a humility as a people, the Western medicine will never be open to something that was not invented in the last 100 or 150 years.
Yes.
And that's at a great detriment to all of us who live in your Western medicine regime.
Yeah, and it's kind of like recently, I would say that the Western medicine started emerging, and we started actually evolving through science exactly. And I would say that in history also there has been so many like failures, and they learn from the failures and they learn from what happened actually. I feel like most of the surgeries that took place, especially during the medieval era, kind of like they realized their mistakes and they kind of like evolved, and like the same thing is happening now. They're evolving from their mistakes, but we are losing democracy at the same time.
Yeah. Well, and that's a great topic, because I do see that I look at the world as being 2 political camps. On the one hand, there are people who want democracy, the pro-democracy movement, and you see it in every nation in the world. And then on the other hand, there are groups of people in every nation in the world that want to consolidate wealth and power into their own hands. That is the natural split that we have had in human politics for 6,000 years. And even before it was called democracy, when it was just, hey, king, you shouldn't be able to kill us indiscriminately. We should at least have some opportunity to plead our case. That's the same efforts of basically trying to instill human rights into an otherwise authoritarian system. And right now, you can see massive parallels between say, the Communist Party of China, the royal family of Saudi Arabia, the oligarchs of Russia, and the absolute top corporate elite of the United States. They are all trying to do the same thing. That is, suck up the money from their society, get to the level where they have no accountability, and be able to be free to do what they want when they have consolidated wealth and power into their own hands. And coronavirus has made it easy for probably half the nations in the world to take a few steps away from democracy. So, for instance, in Sri Lanka, as you probably remember, in the early 2020, there was going to be an election. They postponed the election, and they kept what is a pretty authoritarian government in power unconstitutionally. When you don't have a strong, vibrant democracy, that stuff can just happen. We're fortunate that President Trump did not figure out a way to turn the coronavirus into a power grab for himself. And I think it was mostly because for his base, he wanted to play up the fact that everything was fine. I am the all-powerful leader. Don't worry about it. Coronavirus, it's nothing. So that was his way of manipulating himself into retaining power by manipulating coronavirus. So for him, coronavirus was nothing. We don't need to do anything. Therefore, keep me in power because everything is fine. Other countries have taken the exact opposite approach and said, well, coronavirus is so deadly that you can't gather together. Oh, and that includes you, opposition party, who's trying to win in the next election. Sorry, you can't have more than 5 people together. But it's the same impetus. It is people just trying to consolidate wealth and power into their own hands and using coronavirus as an excuse, like the Communist Party uses a political ideology, like the Saudi Arabian family uses religion. You know, it's whatever tools are available to authoritarians, they will use them. And coronavirus is just yet another neutral tool.
Yeah, I also wanted to talk to you about the election in the US, because I've also heard that there were audits released, and I wanted to make sure whether, is this true, first of all, and did Trump actually win? And yeah, and if so, I don't think he would be a better leader as well. And if he actually won, I actually don't like both of them, Biden or Trump. But yeah, I feel like Biden is like becoming too strict on the rules. And I feel like Trump is the guy, for a leader, he's racist, first of all. And he doesn't understand a lot of things, I would say. And for me, putting him on a pedestal, ruling the entire world, kind of is not the best thing to do right now. What would you say? Yeah.
Yes. So the audits. So last year, my book was published, Last Chance to Save American Democracy. In that book, so mind you, this was published in October, so almost a year ago. I actually predicted the aftermath of the election because I saw all of the pieces being put into place by Republican Party and the Trump allies. So I predicted there would be a violent insurrection in Washington, D.C. And then the audits that have happened afterwards are just a byproduct of that political manipulation. So the insurrection, which really was an attempt to overthrow our government, and the people who were manipulated into doing that, or people who did it willingly, however you want to put it, they believed that President Trump had the backing of the military and would be able to do a coup d'etat. They were completely wrong about that. Trump has alienated the military, and fortunately for us, he did that because otherwise, if he had controlled the military, say like Duarte in Philippines or Erdogan in Turkey, we definitely would have had a coup at that moment, and democracy would be completely over in the United States. The audits, they're just done by groups who literally have been working with the Republican Party to try to overthrow the government. So anything that they find has no basis in fact. But even with their attempts to manipulate the counts, they have not found anything. There's been audits done in almost every single state officially and over half the states are Republican states. So this is not like a Democratic Party conspiracy. In every single Republican audit has found the election was completely honest. Every single Republican government audit has found no problems whatsoever. But the real issue with the United States and Trump is, it takes a while for people to understand this, but Trump was the best thing that happened to democracy in the United States because he was so ineffective and so incompetent in his attempt to take over the government by extraordinary illegal means that the careful planning that's occurred in the United States for the past 10 years to make the Republican Party the forever government was interfered with by Trump. Trump was not what the Republican Party envisioned winning in 2016. Trump was.
That's what I thought as well, because like I don't think it's him. It's just because his actions, the way he does stuff, is actually promoting democracy in a way.
Yeah, the reaction to his efforts
yes.
has increased people's interest in democracy. You are 100% correct. And so, and it's just because he's such a gross human. You know, he is so belittling of women, of ethnic minorities, of people with disabilities. He's just kind of a gross human. Whereas if he had been a more polished leader, he could have taken complete control of the government. But he created too many enemies. And he enjoyed doing that because from a psychological perspective, you know, he's always felt it's him against the world. He's had an inferiority complex. So he can't even imagine himself actually being embraced by everyone. Instead, he has to create enemies so that his people can hate other people. And that is not what the Republican Party wanted. Now they do.
Yeah.
Now it is the Trump Party. And so that's fortunate in the sense that most people around Trump are fairly incompetent. So they really can't follow through on their schemes. But the real threat to democracy started in 2010. And that is when this seminal Supreme Court case occurred that allowed, for the first time in the United States history, rich individuals, so the richest individuals, 90% who are Republican, so very few Democrats amongst, say, the billionaire class, they were now for the first time allowed to spend as much money as they wanted in elections. And spend it they did. In 2010, in some races, they outspent the Democrats 20-1. And this was not Republicans outspending the Democrats. This was a small group of very powerful, rich individuals who were outspending both the Democrat and the Republican parties in elections. So their candidate, which was always Republican, won those elections. And that's why in 2010, the Republicans took control of the federal government in the House of Representatives and a few years later in the Senate. It wasn't because President Obama was not popular. He was extremely popular. That's why he won his election re-election 2 years later. But once they gathered their power through the Citizens United Supreme Court decision, and they were able to spend their way into majorities, and that's what we call the first weapon against democracy in the United States, they were able to then do the second weapon, which was this thing we have called gerrymandering. And gerrymandering, if you can imagine this is how backwards our political system is. We allow the politicians themselves to draw the boundaries of their district, meaning every 10 years, they sit in a room together and they say, okay, I want this neighborhood in my district. I want this street in my district, or I want these 5 houses on this street in my district. And once you're able to do that, and in 2010, they were able to do it for the first time with the aid of computer programming and very sophisticated technology, whereas previous to that, it was all pretty much posters on the walls. Once they were able to do that, then they were able to draw boundaries so that, imagine this, in a state that votes 60% Republican, 60% Democrat, the Republicans were able to maintain 55 to 60% of the seats, meaning even though they were a minority, they remained the government in power. They were able to do that in the House of Representatives and in a number of states that previously were Democrat states, but because of the tremendous amount of money of weapon number one, they temporarily switched over to Republican. And then with the consolidation of the gerrymandered districts, they were able to stay in power, which then allowed them to do their weapon number three, which was be able to suppress votes. And they do that in a variety of ways. For some people, so for instance, students were part of the Obama coalition, the college students. So a number of Republican states said, you can no longer vote with a student ID. Just flat out could not. So if you were from, say, Tennessee and you went to school in Texas, you were no longer allowed to vote in Texas because you didn't have a driver's license, because you don't need a Texas driver's license, you use your Tennessee driver's license, and your student ID would no longer be valid. And so they would do things like that. They would consolidate times to vote. So there was very few times. You know, we are one of the only countries in the world where we vote on a work day, on a Tuesday. And so working class people, they would find their polls would shut by 5 p.m. or 6 p.m., or there'd be so few places to vote, the lines would be 5 or 6 hours. And this happened throughout the United States. So that was weapon number three, voter suppression. And then weapon number four is what caused Trump accidentally. And that is what we call diversionary propaganda, where so much false information is pumped out on a daily basis over the course of the last 8 years that there's a good group of Americans and people worldwide who listen to any of the Fox News empire or any other right-wing media. They're getting pumped so much misinformation, they don't know what the truth is. And so Republicans are able to do certain things, attacks on democracy, and their base never hears about it. And in fact, even the people who oppose Republicans barely hear about it because it's just drowned out by all of the crazy conspiracy theories. So that's what's happened in the last 10 years. But we were fortunate that in 2016, I mean, it was a tragedy that Trump got elected, but we were lucky that it was him and not one of the more intelligent right-wing presidents, because then they would have never relinquished power. They would have stayed in power. And then with the gerrymandering, the voter suppression, the excess money spent by right-wing billionaires, Democrats would never rule again, no matter their percentage of support in the country. That's the crazy thing. And that's how our democracy is so threatened.
So why have the Democrats actually failed during the course of these few years?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I actually have a chapter in my book called Why, Understanding Why the Democratic Party Won't Save Us. And think of it like this. Did you know about gerrymandering before this conversation?
No.
Yeah, most countries don't have it. They can't even imagine it. It makes no sense that politicians can pick their own areas. Well, if you think about it, let's say Republicans have 50% plus one in the House of Representatives, and the Democrats are the minority. So in the House of Representatives, there's, say, 438 seats, okay? Now, the 210 Democrats, again, let's pretend they're in the minority right now, every single one of them owes their seat to gerrymandering. Even though the Republicans have the majority, the Democrat seats are gerrymandered as well. And so if I now want to change the system as a Democrat, I have to convince all of my colleagues who have an amazing career, right? They're being paid unbelievable money for being a congressperson. They have a great healthcare system. They have all of these benefits. They're constantly taken to dinner. They're treated like a little king or queen. I have to convince them that, hey, we have to change the system to get the Republicans out of power. But by the way, you might lose your seat because when we redraw the boundaries, you may now be in my district. And now you're going to have to beat me. Or you may be in a district that now is more Republican than Democrat, and you're going to lose. And likewise, with the money from Citizens United, the corporations, the billionaires, they give money to Democrats too in safe Democratic seats, because the Republicans, they can't win in a seat that's been gerrymandered. So there's 80% Democrats in one seat, and that's how they do it. They put 80% of the Democrats in a couple seats, and then the Republican seats all have 53, 54% Republicans. So Republican votes are spread out and their power is spread out. But for the Democrats, I have to convince them to give up that money. And even though they're the best fundraisers in their district, I have to convince them to give up their safely drawn seat, even though that's how they got elected. So Democrats are reluctant to take the self-sacrifice to fix the system. Not Democrats as a whole, the 100 million Democrats or the 79 million Democrats, they would want the system to be more democratic, but our elected officials, they are torn. And then the other part of it is, the United States has a lot of pride, and we have this pride that we're the world's most important democracy. Republicans have pretty much given up on that. They don't care. They want an authoritarian government. They want a right-wing, authoritarian, possibly Christian government so that their values are upheld. Democrats, they are the ones who actually are the ones who promote the American exceptionalist myth that we are an exceptional country because of our democracy. And so it's hard for Democrats to admit that our democracy is barely surviving. That we, in fact, if you looked at the 190 nations in the world, we're not in the top 10 democracies. We're barely in the top 50 democracies. Our freedom has so slipped in the last 20 years that, we are a democracy under threat, like in India and other countries where more authoritarian leaders have emerged. So it's hard for the Democrats to admit that, because a lot of it was done on their watch while they were in power, and that there's complicated histories behind that. But at the end of the day, they are afraid to tell people the truth. And the flat out truth is, any issue you care about in the United States, whether it's healthcare, the vaccines or no vaccines, social justice, Black Lives Matter, the global climate change, none of it matters. None of it will have any success on it unless we save our democracy. And they can't give that message because they are the leaders of that dying democracy. And so until we replace those leaders in the Democratic Party with a newer generation, because the average leader of the Democratic Party in power is about 78 years of age, Joe Biden's age. The Nancy Pelosi, who's the head of the House of Representatives, is even older than Joe Biden. Until we replace this generation, we're not going to have the truth told to us. And there won't be the inspiration to self-sacrifice amongst the Democrats. So that's why the Democratic Party has been so ineffective.
But it should be their top priority, right?
Agreed. It should be the top priority.
Especially during a time like this, where we are losing everything from mandating vaccines, COVID-19, you have injustice going on everywhere. And that I want to tell you, we have in the book of law, we have a penal code saying discrimination of health is illegal. So mandating vaccines and promoting a vaccine passport or health, health passes is actually an illegal step.
And are you talking about in France or Sri Lanka?
Yes. In Sri Lanka, they have mandated health passes.
I see.
This is illegal, but I went and talked to the pharmaceutical industry, like it's like the doctors there, because like I can engage in conversation with doctors because I know the science behind everything, and so I can have a debate with them. I feel like I'm good in that subject because I can have a debate with them, and I take pictures and I talk to several doctors and I tell them this is not a good idea and why do you promote it? And then they said that we also have, that's why we give attestations out. We give attestations so that they can get the health passes without getting vaccination, just have a negative test result and they get the health passes.
I see.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And, you know, it's hard for me to comment on the government's policy in Sri Lanka. I do not blame your skepticism. Sri Lanka is a country that had a pretty vibrant democracy in the 60s and 70s. When the Tamil War started in 1983, a lot of that democracy was rolled back, and even more so under this current prime minister. And so it's tough when you live in a country where you can't trust the leaders or you can't trust, say, the corporations, like in the United States.
We can't.
It's really hard to,
yeah.
Yeah, it's really hard to know what is the truth, and that's tough. I am someone who believes in the vaccines, but part of that is colored just by the fact that I have a number of people around me with compromised immune systems, and so the idea that I could accidentally give it to them scares me because I don't want to hurt anybody at any time. I would rather take a vaccine that is still in the rather experimental stage if it increases the chance of vulnerable people being able to live out their life free of a debilitating or even deadly disease. But now, if I live in a country like China and the government tells me to take a shot in my arm, I'm going to be very scared about that because I wouldn't put it past the Chinese government to do anything, or the Saudi Arabian government, or the Russian government, or the North Korean government, or the Cuban government for that matter, or right now in Venezuela or Nicaragua. Those are examples of socialist dictators. It's all the same. Anytime you have that consolidation of wealth and power, it doesn't matter if you're a religious country, a socialist country, a capitalist country, it's all the same. It's them, a small group of people versus the rest of us. And it's hard to trust them, even in a time of crisis.
Yes, and it's also like many businessmen also have these contacts with the political parties. Like,
absolutely.
Yes. So
correct.
So they have this really strong relationship. This is how rich people do business.
That's right.
Yes. So the propaganda they give out to the political party, and the political party carries this out in support of these businessmen. You really don't know the truth.
That is very perceptive. And in fact, I would say that is true in almost every country that doesn't have the checks and balances that a vibrant democracy offers. And I think in the United States, we've had that at times where we've had enough checks and balances to tame the lies of corporations. Right now, I think we're in a very vulnerable period where it's really hard to know, for instance, we have a company called Purdue Pharmaceuticals, and Purdue Pharmaceuticals has killed, and I should say allegedly because I don't want to be sued by them because they sue their critics. So they have allegedly killed hundreds of thousands of Americans through the opioid crisis. So they are the company that have produced the opioids that have hooked so many Americans on really deadly drugs. There's been charges against them in various states where they have conspired basically with doctors to prescribe these opioids. And once you're prescribed an opioid, if you're prescribed at a certain level, you basically become addicted fairly quickly, which obviously increases the money for Purdue Pharmaceuticals. So right now, they are in a lawsuit with a number of attorney generals of different states, and they're going to be paying billions and billions of dollars. But they were caught. Not all companies are caught. And that's the problem. So you see something like a Purdue Pharmaceutical, who literally have made their billions by injecting people with a poison that makes them addicted and eventually leads to their death. And then you see something about a COVID vaccine and you're like, wow, this may be the exact situation as the opioid crisis. But on the other hand, maybe it's not. And so that's where it becomes difficult. Like every conspiracy I've heard about the vaccine has some potential element for truth. But there's also just the absolute possibility that these are done by good-hearted scientists using good science, responding to a massive crisis, and they're doing their best they can. And what they're doing is fairly legitimate and it can be trusted.
But
you know, both of those.
Issue. Yeah, there's another issue with that I have to tell you is that when you have to record deaths for when a vaccine is released, you have to record the number of deaths and side effects. And if that number of deaths excels a different amount, like let's say 4,000, you have to take it off the market. That's the rules of the medical industry for pharmaceutical countries. These are the rules. Why hasn't that been administered in this particular case scenario? That's another question to ask.
Well, again, I'm not sure about in Sri Lanka or France, but I know in the United States, the deaths of individuals are determined either by the coroner, who is this unusual position we have in every county in the country. They're completely independent. They have no connections with pharmaceutical companies. They're not well, they may be doctors, but they're not people who prescribe medicine. So they're not in the pocket of big pharma. They are the ones who determine either the deaths or at least the guidelines for reporting the deaths. And so, you know, it is absolutely impossible that the 45,000 hospitals in the United States are all in a conspiracy together with the coroners and the big pharma to suppress the numbers. Like that just doesn't happen.
Yes,
there's no conspiracy that large.
As a leader, you should forget about the conspiracy theories and you must address with what is true. Because the thing is that if I just put myself, if I was in that position, I would be talking about what I'm talking right now. Like I would be like, why this vaccine isn't taken off? Why is there misinformation for doctors who want to speak the truth? Why have they been categorized as misinformation? They are stepping out of their freedom. They're stepping out into freedom, I would say, because we don't have rights of speech as a doctor.
Okay, well, so I think what you can say, what you just said, could absolutely be applied to what you're saying.
Yes.
Meaning, there is a truth.
Yes.
And we all want to get at that truth.
Yes.
Now, on the one hand, something is true. On the other hand, it's not true. If whatever side of the issue you're on, the information that is not true is misinformation, correct? Yeah.
Yes.
And so that misinformation, if it's leading to deaths, is a problem. Now, in the United States, anybody can say anything they want about the vaccine, as obviously, because, you know, there are just thousands and thousands.
No, but like for some doctors, I would say, because I studied medicine, like, so I can tell that what they're saying has truth or what they are saying has no truth to it. Okay. And like, I feel like some of the doctors were actually telling anything bad about the vaccine and basically explaining the theory that causes the effects as well, have been labeled as misinformation. Why?
Yeah. Well, so I would say there's a very simple answer, and it is because the information they're giving is incorrect. That's why it's being called misinformation. If it were truthful, then it would be called truthful information. But when you give false information, that is by definition misinformation.
Yeah, I know, but like there are people who say it's misinformation either from Wikipedia I also like people are banned from YouTube as well because they are actually giving this. But do you know that most of the videos in YouTube are not that accurate as well?
Mhm.
It's the
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah, but here, when you get it wrong, you cause deaths.
Yes.
And so that's a problem. And so, YouTube is a private company. They can do whatever they want.
Yeah.
They're not the government. You don't have a freedom of speech on YouTube.
Yeah.
Freedom of speech in the United States is the government stopping it. It has nothing to do with private corporations. So private corporations, they can block all Republicans, or they can block all Democrats. They can block scientists or religious people. But at the end of the day, we have a group of people in the United States called epidemiologists.
Yes.
I'm sure you have them in
Yes.
Sri Lanka. And it is an absolute consensus amongst epidemiologists. I'm talking to the 99% level that they all believe this vaccine, this COVID-19 is real, and that the vaccines are effective. And there is no debate. It's just crazy people on YouTube who really have no background in epidemiology.
Yes.
And there's a reason for that. When they look at the misinformation in the United States, a good deal of it is being supported financially by the country of Russia. And the reason why Russia is pumping misinformation in the United States is it's a geopolitical stratagem. It has nothing to do with the virus. It's not like, Putin believes, is pro-virus or doesn't believe in the virus. Putin he's a smart guy. He believes in the virus. He got vaccinated. The issue is, for him, he is trying to destabilize the United States government. So anything that causes dissension, they support. So for a while, Russia supported Black Lives Matter. Now, is Black Lives Matter legitimate? Of course it is. Lots of Black lives have been lost unnecessarily to police violence. But Putin supported some Black Lives Matter Facebook page groups and stuff like that because he saw that as causing a conflict in the United States. So that's why Putin is supporting misinformation on the vaccine. It's because it is destabilizing our country. The less people who are vaccinated, the more likely the viruses will continue to morph into new variants. And that causes massive economic disruption.
Yeah. It's also that vaccines, first of all, like this particular vaccine, is even, have you heard the news in the UK? They said that the vaccine is not enough to give protection itself. You can't reach herd immunity with it. And we're losing democracy when you mandate it. So do not mandate, like, how can you tell these political leaders to not mandate?
You're confusing things. Mandating vaccines has nothing to do with democracy. Zero. Democracy is our ability to elect our government and decide who is in power. Vaccine mandates have nothing to do with democracy. The word you're looking for is personal freedom.
Yeah.
And personal freedom is a lot different than democracy, right? Yeah. So personal freedom, do I have the ability to go up to someone, let's say who is African American, and scream racist things at them? Do I have that personal freedom?
No, no, you can't do that.
Yes, I can. Yeah. I can do that. I mean,
you can do it. You can do that, but the thing is that it's bad to do it. Like I would say.
Okay, all right. Now, let's say a government created a law that prohibited me from doing that. So they said, for instance, in Germany, you can't express pro-Nazi rhetoric. Do we lose democracy when the government creates that rule?
Yeah, as personal freedom, yeah, you kind of differentiated both of them for me.
Yeah, and so it's personal freedom, and personal freedom stops at my ability to hurt other people. So I don't have the personal freedom to take a hammer and hit someone because I don't like them, right? And so then the question becomes, do I have the personal freedom to knowingly expose a sick person to a disease that will kill them? Do you feel like I have that personal freedom to do that?
No. Like,
Okay, why not?
yeah, the thing is that no, wait, I'm again confusing it to democracy. The thing is that you can, because it's your point of view, and people have to, you can tell, it's the way you articulate the information to the public to tell your side of the story, I would say. But but sometimes the government has to take precise rules in protecting their country.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
So now, do you feel like, let's say I knew I had AIDS. Okay, here's a different example. We'll take it away from COVID. Let's say I had AIDS, HIV.
Yes.
And I know I have HIV, and I have a sexual partner who does not know I have HIV, and I give HIV to that, for me, it would be a woman. So I give HIV to that woman.
But are you unaware that you have HIV? Or
No. I'm aware I have it. I'm aware I have it. Should the government create a law that punishes me for giving HIV to that person?
No.
You don't think so?
No.
So even though now I've given her a disease,
but
you think that's okay?
I would say it's your responsibility to do your part in society by isolating them, or telling them that you have these conditions before going into before going into situations, I would say.
Right.
Yeah, make the other person aware, like, I have this, I got into a little accident and I have HIV. And yeah, I think you have to tell it out to people so they could make a choice.
Sure. But now let's say I don't. Now let's say, and maybe I got it from a blood transfusion.
Yeah.
I got it. Now you and I are boyfriend and girlfriend. Do you feel like the government owes you any protection from me because I know I have HIV? Do you think the government should protect you by creating a law that says if you have HIV, you have to tell your partner?
That's a tricky question.
Yeah. And so, but it's a question about personal freedom.
Yes.
It's not a question about democracy, because some countries will say, yes, you have a responsibility to tell your partner, and others will say, no, it's a private matter, it's responsibility.
These are like ethical issues. Like you have to take that responsibility to warn other people about it. Like I feel like because you're bringing another person to your own life and they are getting affected by it, so it's your responsibility to notify that person.
How about this? So now I don't have HIV, but I like to drink.
Yes.
And you and I, we go out, I get drunk, and I don't want you to drive because I'm a sexist pig. I want to drive, but now I'm totally drunk. All right. We drive.
Yeah.
And I'm a big guy, so you don't want to get in the car, but I make you get in the car with me. We drive and we get in an accident and you're hurt. Should there be a law against me driving drunk?
Yes.
And why is that?
Because the thing is that you can't take control of a situation like that because you're not mentally there, I would say, mentally present at that moment. So you have to give the wheel to someone who's mentally present, who hasn't tracked much. And like you said, like I'm the perfect person for that because I don't drink that much.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But okay. But why is it that I should give control? So you're correct. I'm not in the right mental state. But why is it I should give you control? Because what happens if I don't give you control and I drive drunk? What is the possibilities that could happen?
Like another person can get hurt as a result.
That's right. I could hurt an innocent person.
Yeah.
All right. So now let's go back to COVID. You agree the government should stop someone from hurting innocent people.
Yes.
Now, let's say I'm in an area, not like you, but in an area in, say, the United States where COVID, the Delta variant is running wild.
Yes.
And, 40%, and there's some towns right now that up to 40% of the people have COVID. But in this town, there's a number of older people. Let's say it's a retirement village. And I work at a restaurant, okay? I'm someone who I like to party. Let's pretend. I'm way too old for that. But if I did like to party, I keep going to parties, I'm eventually going to get COVID. I'm going to get it. But I feel like I'm healthy. I'll survive it. Not that big a deal. I survived the flu. I'll survive COVID. But I work in a community where there's a lot of old people who won't survive it.
Yes.
Doesn't the government have a responsibility to protect those old people?
Yes.
Okay. And so if the only way is by either making me get a vaccine or I can't work with older people, don't you think that's fair?
You can't work with older people, I would say. But you have the freedom to choose whether to get the vaccine or not. So exactly. I would say do your part. Make sure you do your part and contribute to society. But the vaccine should be like, it should be a choice.
Yes. And I would agree with that I would probably mostly agree with that. But that's where the passport becomes effective, right? Because I don't want the vaccine, but I still want to work as a cook in the senior center. And I'm probably going to end up killing half the seniors,
yes.
Right? So that's where the government says...
Can they detail the law like that?
Well, they could. And that's what the vaccine passports are for, is I have to be able to show to my employer that, hey, I am not a risk to the children or the seniors or the people with compromised immune systems if I work for you. Or to get on an airplane, right? We're in this metal tube for the United States.
Why can't they section the airplane is like for people who are like not vaccinated or in the different side of the plane, while the elderly are in a different side of the plane. Like there are many solutions to this than mandating the vaccines, I would say.
Well, remember that for the airlines, they are the ones they are making this decision themselves. It's not a government mandate. Yes. That's why some airlines have it and some airlines don't. And it's a cost thing. So if the airlines think for a minute that it's cost effective to put up some type of barrier and some air filter systems, they'll do that. But if they don't think it's cost effective, they won't do it.
But you have to wear a mask, I would say. Mask is an obligation. And I would say you have to wear the mask, because even though it doesn't it gives some sort of protection. Everybody was arguing that since masks are not proven to be effective, why should you wear it? I think that it does give protection. That's why you wear it in the first place, because these are openings where any germ can actually go and you can have any disease from it. So your mouth is the main opening, your nose, your eyes, and your ears. So that I would say the mask is effective to a certain extent. So do your part to society.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, I think it is effective to a certain extent. And so I feel like I think you make some really good points about personal freedom that are difficult, right?
Yes.
And some countries are getting it right and some aren't, and some are getting it right and then they get it wrong and then they get it right again. And I think that's because it's an evolving thing. President Biden, 2 months ago announced basically that, hey, we won, the virus is over, let's take the masks off, open up the businesses, forget about social distancing. And then the Delta variant occurred. And then he had to walk all of that back. Yeah. And I don't think it's because he's trying to end democracy. Yeah. He's just trying to end the pandemic, because the economy is crashing when people are afraid to get sick. So he's trying to end that because he wants to be reelected.
Yeah, that's also a problem, because they want power. This is the motivation for power, I would say. But what should be their real purpose?
You mean politicians generally?
Yeah.
I mean, that is a wonderful question that I wish more people would ask, because we forget what the role of politicians are. And the role of politicians, at least in a democracy, is very simple. They're supposed to represent the interests of the people who elected them and of the nation as a whole. So it's simple. They help our interests. But when they're bought off by corporations, when they're bought off by the promise of a cushy job, if they cooperate now, they can get jobs for their family members or for them in the future, then they no longer care about our interests. They care about the interests of the people who pay them money to get elected. And in the United States, that is the rich people. That is corporations and the richest people. 97% of all political money in the system comes from billionaires or large corporations, 97%. The other 3% is from the rest of us. And so when you think about it from that perspective, Congress really is created by the richest, most powerful people to protect their interests, not our interests. And their interests, believe me, the richest corporations in the world do not want COVID. You know, maybe a couple pharmaceutical companies, a couple mask companies, but on the whole, you know, when I'm like in my little town, we went out last night for my wife's birthday. I can't tell you how many businesses have been put under. I'm talking like big businesses, chains have lost all of their commerce because of the COVID-19. So corporate America is against COVID-19. They are not part of a conspiracy. They are desperate for it to be over because they are losing massive amounts of money. Some are winners, but on the whole, it's mostly losers.
Yeah, especially like people can't handle like a period of discomfort. Like I feel like every minute there's something bad happening, they're complaining about it. Like, I mean, for the time being, I mean, you can do something about it, but no, they want to take the easy way out. They want to take, okay, what is the closest thing that I can go out? So we don't have lockdowns. Okay, the vaccine, let's take it.
Yeah.
And they're out.
Yeah, I think people are pretty desperate right now. I think if, I think they would do anything to end this, some of us, right? And then others don't even want to wear a mask.
But they
don't believe it's a virus.
But they still have the potential of spreading the disease. They have the potential of taking the disease. And just because they're vaccinated, they don't wear the mask, and then you're still spreading it. Again, same scenario is happening again.
Yeah, agreed. And that's partly because of the variant of Delta. And if you people talk about the variant out of context. The context of the variant is that the pharmaceutical companies have created a for-profit product, the vaccine, that they only want to distribute for profit. And for countries that can't afford a vaccine for everyone, their people are living unvaccinated and dying. I mean, that's why COVID still exists in so many countries in a really a tragic state.
There are other factors affecting that situation. Like if you take a country like India, they have overpopulation, and so that is also a problem. And some of the areas, their living conditions aren't good. So obviously, you're going to find a lot of people dying. But if you are properly isolated, if you are properly nourished, first of all, in places like Africa, you have malnourishment occurring, and no, even water. Water is not available to most.
Water scarcity. That's right.
Most country. So those factors also affect the disease. It's just not one tiny thing.
Yes, agreed. And those conditions make people more susceptible to getting sicker faster. And they'll get sicker faster from the flu, from a common cold. So those are all things that jeopardize people's health. But the issue is, unless everybody is vaccinated, there'll continue to be evolutions of this virus. This virus has shown itself to be very quick to adapt. And so we're going to keep having new waves of coronavirus, each one probably more deadly than the last, until we're able to achieve the type of herd immunity that, as you know, is so difficult, but that we have achieved in other diseases. But until we do, this disease is going to stay with us. And you and I could have this conversation 2 years from now, and we'll still have coronavirus.
We need to opt for, aim for a cure, because the vaccines are not effective. everything that is coming up is not effective. And this cure, I don't know, it should be holistic as well, because we can't depend on the drug industry as well for this the types of situations.
Right. And I agree with that. Although I would just, I would say that instead of using the word effective, when you say the vaccine is not effective, I think the proper word is it's not perfect.
Yes.
Because it is effective. In the United States, right now, only 2 or 3% of the people dying have vaccines, meaning 98% of the people who are currently dying in the United States from COVID-19 are the unvaccinated. And so the vaccine, it's not perfect, but it's at least stopping people from dying. Yes, they continue to pass it on, but if, for instance, my wife and I are vaccinated, if I get COVID-19, I will probably give it to her, but neither one of us will probably die. Yeah. And so it is effective, it's just not perfect.
And it depends on your fate as well, as I said before. So the numbers again, do not give a definite answer. I would say the numbers, we have to opt for a cure. That's a better solution than all of this.
Agreed. And obviously there are companies who are trying to make the cure because they will become massive billion-dollar companies the moment they come up with the cure. So there is a race for the cure. But I think it just shows you how difficult it is to find a cure. That, even a year and a half later, I don't know if anyone's close to a cure at this point, but certainly stop smoking, lose if you have extra fat, lose extra fat, get in shape, eat well, eat organic, nutritious food. Those are all important things to do that will increase your chances of surviving it. And any solution without that holistic nature is just a partial solution, right? Because what good is it if you have a COVID vaccine, a COVID cure, but then you die of cancer because you eat sugar all the time, right? We need a better approach to our health that encompasses a whole bunch of different things, only one of which is either vaccines or medicinal cures. That's the last part of it. We're missing the first 4 or 5 elements of just living a healthy life.
We need to lead a healthy life. I think that I made a video because I was so scared of because the vaccine just came out too soon, and I was like, what about the autoimmune people who have autoimmune diseases?
It barely helps them.
Yes, but the elderly are at risk naturally because they have a very weak immune system as you grow older.
That's right.
And pregnancy, you are trying to, your immune system is trying to a fight for 2 people there. So obviously you have the weak immune system. And plus I also read a document that was shown to me from a pharmacist, because she said that this is what we look for when for people who are not considered to be vaccinated, but they don't look at this information, and sometimes that's their responsibility that the deaths were caused. And I was like, that's why I'm trying to look at it to actually tell this information. Okay, when you go to the pharmacist, when you ask for a health pass, there is a way to get without vaccination. And I took a picture of that document, and it said that from the second dose, if you have signs of multi-organ inflammation, or you have pericarditis or myocarditis, you are supposed to not take the vaccine. And children of 12 years old are also dying because they have heart problems after this vaccine. So
again, so we're dealing in the realm of, it is not perfect, but it is effective for a lot of people. And that's one of the issues, that if something will stop the deaths of millions of people but cause the deaths of a few thousand, is it worth it? And that's where personal freedom comes into
Yeah,
play.
it's like
right?
5,000. Like the deaths have escalated 5,000 according to like CDC news. But we had to like keep up with it because the thing is that normally for diseases like the swine flu, after 54 deaths, like the vaccine was taken out of the market and another vaccine was put in replace of it.
Sure, but that was a disease that killed a few hundred people.
Yes.
So we always have to look at the reality of the facts on the ground.
Yes.
The reality is that in 50 states, over 600,000 Americans have died. That's not a conspiracy of,
yes.
Of doctors making false claims.
Yes.
That, in fact, many people feel that's undercounted because a lot of people die at home without ever having gone to the hospital for COVID because they don't have health insurance or they didn't think it was that serious. So many people estimate the numbers to be well over 1 million people in the United States.
Yeah, I also want to tell you something is that they should make like these political parties should have put another law so that they could save these people that so that people who die from the vaccine actually get something out of it at the end of the day, because I feel like that part has been completely neglected out.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Would you, let's say I was a lawmaker and I said, yes, I'll agree to that if you agree to the following addition, and that is if to make people liable who spread COVID-19.
Yes.
Right? So if you decided not to get the vaccine and you go to my uncle's birthday party,
yes.
and then my uncle dies because you gave him COVID-19, should we be able to sue the person who gave us COVID-19?
No.
Okay. Well, then I can't accept your law. I can't accept your law because, I believe in personal responsibility. So if you choose not to get the vaccine and that causes someone else to die, you are responsible and you should go to jail.
Yeah.
Is that not personal responsibility?
No. Yeah.
You've killed my ultimate freedom of living.
Yeah. But like even cold spread like this, less infectious disease, and people die of cold too. So I would say that.
Yeah, but there's no vaccine for the cold.
Yeah. No, there is a vaccine, but it's not effective. The COVID-19 vaccine was actually made from the cold vaccine.
Sure, but let's put it this way: no one in America gets the cold vaccine.
Yes.
I mean, right, and
yes.
And only a few people die from the cold every year. The flu, more people die, but from colds, it's pretty much only people with massive pre-existing conditions.
Yes.
But all I know is that if you believe in the flip side of personal freedom is personal responsibility. You can't have any personal freedom unless you also enforce personal responsibility. Yeah. And so my freedom to not get the vaccine necessarily invokes my personal responsibility if I get sick and I hurt other people.
Yeah.
Because they have a personal freedom to not be infected. Like everyone has the personal freedom not to be killed, but if you bring in a disease, it's almost like if you put poison in my drink, right? And I die. Well, that's your fault. You brought the poison into my house.
Then it's first degree murder. Yeah.
Well, it should be, but how is it any different if you brought a deadly disease into my house and you knew about it? How is that different?
The thing is that you have to take you should have responsibility for it.
Right? So your personal freedom not to take the medicine stops unless you also accept personal responsibility for the consequences of your actions.
Yes.
See, in the United States, we have a large group of people who don't believe in consequences for personal action. They only believe in the personal freedom. So they like to have a gun, but they don't want to have any background checks on the guns. We've had technology where you could pair a gun with a fingerprint, meaning the only person that could shoot that gun would be you with your fingerprint. But people don't want that because they think that infringes on their personal freedom. But if someone else takes my gun and kills somebody, I don't want any responsibility for that death, even though I could have stopped it by buying a gun that only would shoot with my finger. And so you can't have both. excuse me, you can't have one without the other.
Yeah,
And that's the problem in our society, is that
both.
Everybody wants personal freedom. Nobody wants personal responsibility.
I take the responsibility as well. Like even in a situation like this, because I know both sides of the situation, I'm aware of it. And I feel like that's why I'm living in a hill.
Exactly, right? You're staying isolated. You're being careful. You believe in masks. You've taken personal responsibility. You probably know what are the riskiest situations. My guess is if you got sick and you had a fever and a cough all of a sudden, my guess is you would not go to your sister's birthday party, right? Yeah. Right? Because you're afraid you might give them COVID. You're a perfect example of someone who wants personal freedom and is willing to take personal responsibility. Unfortunately, there's too many people who only want the personal freedom.
Yeah. And I wish there was a better law instead of mandating vaccines. Mandate the mask. Educate the people on personal responsibility. And it should go hand in hand with personal freedom as well.
So in Sri Lanka, are they mandating a vaccine for every citizen?
Yeah, but the thing is that there is also a trick there because nobody's obeying it. They're putting
attestation.
Yeah. They're actually putting fake documents for this one. So the thing is that fake documents happen all the time there. Like I know it. So even so the thing is that here, if you have a fake document, you are in jail for 3 years.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Very true.
Yes.
That's the ultimate personal responsibility.
Yes. So I mean, like if you get the attestation, that's a legal document. Like I would it's not fake.
Yeah.
It's legal.
Yeah.
So I would say that's like the difference. That's the difference. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. Yeah, I think in the United States, I don't think we'll ever have the vaccines mandated, but there will be companies who will say you can't work here unless you're vaccinated. Although right now, the way they're phrasing it is you're either vaccinated or you get tested on a weekly basis. And that to me is a good balance of personal freedom and personal responsibility.
Yeah.
But there's plenty of companies or that don't require that. So if you don't want the vaccine, you can quit your job over, say, at UPS and get a job elsewhere that doesn't require it, or you can start your own business. No one's going to force you to take personal responsibility, but also, companies have the right to protect their workers and to protect their clients. Like if all of a sudden we have a popular restaurant, well, let's say McDonald's or Starbucks. If all of a sudden Starbucks said, hey, we don't require masks and our workers don't get have to get shots, and then a couple of people claimed they got coronavirus from drinking Starbucks, that would wipe the company out.
Yeah.
And so they're going to be as responsible as possible just to save the bottom line. And Starbucks doesn't get any money by cooperating with pharmaceutical companies. They're just trying to look out for the best interests of their clientele, because without their clientele, there is no business.
Yes, so we spoke for like 1 hour and 30 minutes, and
that went quick.
Yeah, it was so interesting. I wish I can have you again on this podcast, because I feel like you're one of those people, like the conversation just flew. Like, and we kind of didn't notice that it was going on.
It's true. I don't even have my glasses. I can't. Wow, it is 9:30. You're right.
So yeah.
Well, you're a great interviewer. I really enjoyed speaking with you.
Oh, thanks. I really enjoy speaking with you because you are one of those people who are like really interesting, and I'm like actually reading your book as well. And I find it like really interesting about these topics. So
I'm so glad to hear that.
And I'm trying to like kind of connect the dots. Because I am educated in a different field, and you're educated in a different section of life. So I just need to put the dots in this situation and connect it.
You're right. Yeah. You have a very hungry mind, and I can see you want to gather as much information about the world as possible to make it all make sense. And I really admire that.